Let's grow together. And now with an inspiring message today, Reverend Martin.
Two little boys were in Sunday school where they were introduced for the very first time to the idea of Satan. And vivid and frightening scenes described miserable sinners enduring the torments of hell, all kinds of horrible things perpetrated by the malevolent prince of darkness. And wide-eyed and trembling, one little boy asked the other, "Do you think there really is a real devil?" And his little friend said, "Nah, it's probably like Santa Claus, turns out to be your dad." Well, today we honor fathers, the masculine half of the parenting process. And it seems that Father's Day has always played second fiddle to Mother's Day. In fact, one little kid described Father's Day as follows: "It's just like Mother's Day, only you don't spend as much." And in the United States last year, Hallmark sold 141 million cards for Mother's Day, but only 93 million for Father's Day. And you may remember those olden days of landline telephones where you had to pay extra for long-distance phone calls. Well, the Bell system reported year after year that Mother's Day had the highest volume of long-distance phone calls. And Father's Day, year after year, held the record for the most long-distance collect calls. Well, we celebrate fathers for their contributions to our lives on the third Sunday in June, a Sunday which happens to be near to the summer solstice, sometimes right on it, the longest day of the year. And in parts of the north, right now, the sun is shining 24/7. And of course, we know that without energy from the sun, all life on earth would perish. And without the encouragement and protection of fathers, children can face many hardships. So it's synchronistic that Father's Day falls on or near the date that the earth receives its maximum dose of sunlight. And how it came to be the third Sunday in June is another bit of synchronicity. Two people in completely different parts of the country who, as far as we know, never had any contact with each other, were part of starting our tradition of Father's Day. In Illinois, a man named Harry Meeks, who was past president of the Chicago Lions Club, advocated for an official day to honor fathers. And he traveled speaking to various Lions clubs, seeking their support. And they set the first Father's Day for the third Sunday in June. Now, meanwhile, in Spokane, Washington, a Mrs. Sonora Smart Dodd thought of honoring fathers while listening to a Mother's Day sermon in 1909. Her own father was a farmer who single-handedly raised his 6 children after his wife died. And Mrs. Dodd petitioned the Spokane Ministerial Association to have a Father's Day celebration on June the 5th, which was the date of her father's birthday. But the ministers wanted more time to prepare their sermons, so they chose the third Sunday in June. In 1924, Mr. Meeks and the Lions Club petitioned President Calvin Coolidge to make Father's Day an official holiday. And Coolidge declined, but he did issue a statement saying, "The widespread observance of this occasion is calculated to establish more intimate relations between fathers and their children, and also to impress on fathers their full measure of obligation." Well, in 1936 in New York City, a National Father's Day Committee was established, and they asked Congress to formalize the holiday. But once again, the attempt failed. And in 1957, Senator Margaret Chase Smith, who was the first woman to serve both as a member of the United States House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, she submitted the following proposal to Congress. She writes, "As far as I can gather, it seems that Congress has been guilty now for 40 years of the worst possible oversight, to say the least, perpetrated against the gallant fathers, young and old, of our land. As a daughter, as a woman, as a United States Senator, I must say as strongly as I know how that the conduct of the Congress in this regard should cause us to hide our faces in shame. And here is why. Either we honor both of our parents, mother and father, or let us desist from honoring either one. But to single out just one of our two parents and omit the other is the most grievous insult imaginable." Well, you're thinking, certainly that did the trick, but it didn't. The Congress rejected that resolution as well. So it wasn't until 1966 that President Lyndon Johnson issued a proclamation declaring the third Sunday in June National Father's Day. And it wasn't until 1972 that Father's Day became an official federal holiday when it was signed into law by President Richard Nixon. Now, fortunately, Mrs. Sonora Smart Dodd of Spokane, Washington, lived to see Father's Day become official. She died in 1978 at the age of 96. Well, why did it take so very long to honor dads? It could be that American popular culture seems to be far more critical of fathers than mothers. A lot of publicity surrounds deadbeat dads who abandon their children and don't pay child support. And the mass media frequently portrays dads negatively. Cartoons, TV sitcoms, and commercials frequently depict dad as a buffoon. And in reality, of course, there are millions of responsible dads who are steady and dependable and working hard to provide for their families financially and emotionally. And that is so very important because fatherlessness as a condition has been linked to virtually every social ill you can name. Young men who grow up without fathers are twice as likely to end up in jail. 63% of youths who commit suicide are from fatherless homes, and 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. Now, if you had a father knows best type of dad, you were blessed. A father who had all the answers and always understood and never raised his voice and always had a twinkle in his eye. This little story from Reader's Digest illustrates the type. One day, I received my learner's permit, and my father agreed to take me out for a driving lesson. With a big grin, he hopped into the back behind the driver's seat. "Why aren't you sitting up front on the passenger side?" I asked. He replied, "Kirsten, I've been waiting for this ever since you were a little girl. Now it's my turn to sit back here and kick the seat." Now, most fathers really can't measure up to the perfect ideal of fatherhood. But chances are, your dad wasn't nearly as bad as the current Hollywood version of fatherhood. For most of us, our experience of dad was somewhere between those two extremes. I experienced two different fathers growing up. The fun-loving, totally involved father that I remember fondly. The father who would get dressed up in an improvised costume and act out such literary gems as The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere or 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And that father was with us until I was about 10 years old. And then my dad got the idea that God wanted him to be a Baptist minister, just like his father and most of the other men in his family. And almost overnight, our fun-loving father disappeared and was replaced by a man who was obsessed with sin and guilt and damnation. And that father persisted until his death many years later. Now, as a little kid, I couldn't make any sense out of it. Why would becoming a minister of the gospel, gospel being a word that literally means good news, why would being a minister of the gospel lead to an obsession with misery? And it took me years to figure that out, and took me more years to realize that considering his belief system, he was living the only way he knew how. His God was a vengeful and angry God, just waiting to punish him if he were to step out of line, even a little bit. And once I figured that out, it took me more years to come to terms with it and to forgive him for changing so dramatically, and to forgive myself for judging him so harshly. I finally accepted that he was doing the best he could based on who he was and what he believed, and furthermore, that the person he had hurt the most was himself. Now, interestingly, considering his preoccupation with a God who would punish you for the slightest infraction, my father never did the disciplining in our house. My mother never once said, "You just wait till your father gets home," because she knew that he was too soft-hearted to punish us. I often hear people say things like, "My father was never there for me." And of course, we often want things from our parents that they can't provide. And that can be a good thing. When dads don't give us everything we want, we can grow up learning to be more capable of providing for ourselves. If we're not given everything we want while growing up, it can encourage us to develop a healthy self-reliance. Every year at this time, I ask myself, what do I want to say about Father's Day? And sometimes no answer comes. So maybe instead of what to say about fatherhood, a better question is, what lessons can we learn about fatherhood? And the first lesson that comes to mind is, forgive your father. I officiate at several funerals every year, and many of them are not people that have any connection to this center. They're people who aren't really even religious particularly, but they think that on such a solemn occasion as a funeral, they should have a minister at the service. So I meet with the family to find out the details about the deceased so I can personalize my remarks. And sometimes at funerals of older men, I learn that one or more of the adult children are carrying grudges against the deceased for something he may have done many years ago, or for something that he should have done and failed to do. And at such times, I try to work a little bit of counseling into my talk. Things like, forgive your father. He was human. He made mistakes. But who among us hasn't? And if you have children, you'll want them to forgive you too. Because Dad is only human. He may be prone to failure, and he may be a great deal short of perfect, just like we can be. And this means two things. You're a lot like your dad in that you have your strengths and weaknesses, and being human, you will need to get in touch with your spiritual side to be able to forgive him. It's easy to think of our Father as choosing to be distant, abusive, a damnation-obsessed Baptist preacher, or whatever, and thus hold him responsible for annoying us or wounding us. However, remember that he was a child once too, and whatever he was may have been due to his parents' failures, the schooling he received or didn't receive, and other influences. So eventually, you may want mercy too, and therefore you would do well to show mercy. Forgive us as we forgive those who trespass against us. And it's so easy to slip into the habit of focusing on their shortcomings. But if we're honest, we'll learn to recognize our Father's strong points. And if we're compassionate, we'll learn to forgive his weaknesses. And in the process, we'll learn to do the same thing with regard to ourselves. Forgiveness opens up the grace channel, whereas resentment clogs it up, shuts it down, cuts off the flow of every good thing that life is always trying to give us. If our Father is still living, Father's Day gives us an opportunity to encourage Dad in the same way we would like to be encouraged. It's an opportunity to reconcile any differences that we may not yet have healed. And although things have started changing in the past few years, for most of the history of humankind, men were expected to keep their emotions bottled up, to maintain a stiff upper lip regardless of circumstances. And that emotional distance, which so many of them were raised with, may have made it all the more difficult to reconcile family differences or problems. It's easy to blame Dad for our hurts or disappointments, but what we may not realize is that Dad also suffered because of that emotional distance. There's a Spanish story of a father and son who had become estranged. The son ran away, and the father set out to find him. And he searched for months with no luck. Finally, in a last desperate effort to find him, the father put an ad in a Madrid newspaper. And the ad read, "Dear Paco, meet me in front of this newspaper office at noon on Saturday. All is forgiven. I love you." On Saturday, 800 Pacos showed up, looking for forgiveness and love from their fathers. Well, if you're a father, you know that sometimes what causes resentment in your children today might be the right thing in the long run. Dad sometimes has to do the unpopular or difficult thing, regardless of what kind of temper tantrum the kid may throw. Another story from Reader's Digest. After an explosive argument with our mother, my little brother posted a sign on his room saying, "I hate Mom," and he slammed the door shut. My dad, a school psychologist, came home to this standoff. "I'll take care of it," he told the mother, and he went into the little boy's room. Minutes later, Dad came out and told Mom, "Well, he doesn't hate you anymore." And sure enough, the sign had been replaced with one that said, "I hate Dad." Many of you will remember the TV shows from your childhood, such as Father Knows Best, or Make Room for Daddy, or Leave It to Beaver. And these shows always depicted the father in the family as hardworking, all-knowing, all-forgiving, all-providing, a mentor, a protector, a role model in the so-called typical American home of the 50s. And while many call these shows unrealistic, I think they make a statement about one of the greatest desires within each of us, the desire to feel loved, guided, cherished, provided for, and protected and supported by someone or by something larger and more powerful than we see ourselves as being. And so it was that the great teacher Jesus was fully aware of this inherent desire, thus proving it wasn't just a phenomenon of the 1950s. He knew that it was human nature to desire and seek love, guidance, and protection, which is why he referred to God as Father. Jesus was intentionally sort of creating a bridge to God through an idiom with which people could relate. He wanted to assist others in experiencing an intimate relationship with a God of unconditional love, who prior to that time had been thought of as an angry, withholding, judgmental, and punishing God. Well, in today's world, we know that not everyone has been blessed with the best relationship with his or her father. And that's why it's so important to remember that we can choose to spiritualize the entire concept of father, as Jesus did, by getting in touch with the presence of God within, a presence which knows only to love. Jesus knew that he had to make God approachable, and that's why it's important to understand what he meant when he referred to God as Abba, A-B-B-A. That's Aramaic. And the word Abba literally means daddy. We know that when a child refers to his father as daddy, there's a great deal of intimacy, love, trust, and caring present. Essentially, an authentic bond between father and child. And in Jesus' day, the head of the household was a deeply respected, devoted, fierce protector and provider for his children. Jesus thought of God in the same way. And he explained this whole dynamic in his own version of Father Knows Best, which is the parable of the Prodigal Son. And in this parable, Jesus depicts the Father as the wise, generous, non-judgmental, and totally unconditionally loving Father that you and I would be pleased and grateful to have. So we could just as easily call the story of the Prodigal Son, Abba Knows Best. Now, about the only time we ever hear the word prodigal is in connection with this parable. The basic meaning of the word prodigal is wasteful, but more than just wasteful, extravagantly wasteful. You may recall the story. There was a man who had 2 sons. The youngest son said to his father, "Give me the share of the estate that is coming to me." He didn't want to wait for his father to die. He wanted his inheritance now. So the father divided his estate between the 2 sons. And not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had and set off for what was called a far country or a distant country. And there he squandered his wealth, his inheritance, in riotous living. Now, riotous living in today's language would be running wild or partying hard. Growing up in a very strict Baptist home, I used to fantasize about getting in on some of that riotous living. And what is meant by the far distant country? Well, it refers to separating ourselves from God, cutting ourselves off from our source of good. The prodigal son didn't realize that this was what he was doing. He was too busy enjoying the party to notice. And when the son had squandered and spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in dire need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out into his fields to feed pigs. Now, this was the ultimate degradation for a Jew. It was not only forbidden to eat pork, just to touch a pig was considered sinful and unclean. And it says that this young man longed to fill his stomach with the slop that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. He was looking for someone to help him, not realizing that his only help was to be found within. Because when we cut ourselves off from the supply of good, it's up to us to reconnect with it. No one else can do that for us. And so when the young man finally came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will get up and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' So he got up and began walking back to his father." Returning to the Father is a metaphor for awakening to who and what we really are. It's an acknowledgement of and a return to the perfection in which we were born. And so he set out to return to the Father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming and was filled with compassion. And he ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father told the servants, "Bring quickly the very best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, put shoes on his feet." There was no condemnation, no probation period, no, "I'll take you back under these conditions." The son had made mistakes, big mistakes, and they were deliberate and totally self-inflicted. But none of that was taken into account. The father said, "Let's have a feast and celebrate." So a big party was had, and they ate, drank, and were merry. Now the older son had been working out in the field, and as he drew nearer to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. The servant said, "Your brother has come home, and because he's safe and sound, your father is called for a celebration." But the son was angry and would not go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. And the son said, "I stayed here. I never transgressed your commands at any time, and you never gave me a party. But as soon as this son of yours comes home, he who wasted half of the estate, you celebrate." And the father said, "It was right that we should make merry and be glad. For your brother, who was dead, is alive again, was lost, and is found." Clearly, Jesus meant for us to see that the loving and non-judgmental Father in the story was a metaphor for the nature of God. And to each of us, the sons, both the one who wandered off, meaning he forgot who he really was and what he had, and then remembered and came home, and the stay-at-home son who never had a clue of what he always had just by being the son of his father. Jesus' consciousness had no place for a distant God, a superior court judge in the sky, waiting to punish us for every mistake. So we should be grateful that we have a spiritual Father who always embodies every good thing and who's always offering us every good thing, regardless of what we do. So, if our biological father was less than perfect or even entirely absent from our lives, it doesn't mean that we've not had a perfect fatherhood experience. Our spiritual Father, who is perfect, has always been and always will be. And in that sense, every day is Father's Day. Our earthly fathers, as we've seen, can be a mixed bag. And it can be complicated because families are complicated and often messy. And sometimes it takes years to realize that our experience of fatherhood wasn't nearly as bad as we might have imagined at the time. Mark Twain put it very well when he wrote, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old guy had learned in 7 years." So this Father's Day, if it's appropriate, honor your earthly father well. And then honor the Father within. Take time to make room for ABBA in your daily life. Get up close and personal with the divine. If you're not as close to God as you used to be, who moved? Return home and see your Father through new eyes. Pray, meditate, continue to grow, and it'll amaze you how much your experience of God has changed. New dads, old dads, granddads, dads-in-law, stepdads, goofy dads, serious dads. There must be a million fatherly types out there, and without a doubt, there are at least that many reasons to honor them on this day. And always remember that sometimes it's the simplest things that make all the difference from a father or a father figure. After the assassination of President Kennedy, his young son, John Jr., asked William Haddad, an associate of JFK's, "Are you a daddy?" And Haddad told him, yes, he was. And in response, little John Jr. said, "Then will you throw me up in the air?" What is a father? Well, there could be many answers, but today is for all the fathers, whoever they are and however they appear. It's for the grandfathers, uncles, brothers, friends, and sons. For the most important man in anyone's life, the one who gave us life. So here's to you, the dads who play endless games of Go Fish with their kids and always let them win, and those who always played to win every time, thinking that their children would grow stronger through defeat. This is for the fathers who worked in fields and factories, taught in classrooms, or sat in office cubicles 8 hours a day. Here's to those who performed life-saving surgery and those who drove their truck through long days and nights. Here's to those who loved every moment of their labor and to those who only worked so their families could survive. To the sleepless dads who have waited in silent fear that their babies wouldn't make it through the night, or their teenagers survived their first time driving alone. Those who lost children and those who found them in different ways. Here's to tears not shed and hugs not given for fear of appearing weak. Here's to dads who build with hammers and saws and those who wouldn't know how. Here's to fathers who are afraid of spiders and yet can slay the great dragon of fear in their little ones. The fathers who tried, the fathers who didn't, the fathers who gave us life and walked away, and those who stayed long past the life of their marriage to give something to their children. The fathers who hurt because their children have been kept from them, and those who must be both father and mother. Stay-at-home dads and stay-awake dads, the one we wanted and never knew, the helpless hurting father and the brave strong one. For all the ways of fatherhood, here's to you. Have a Namaste Father's Day.